Hi, everybody, and welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you today in partnership with Calabrio, Auscontact's national gold sponsor. Today's session is entitled Realising the Benefits of WFM and Why Size Doesn't Matter. I'm sure we've all heard lots of conversation about, the differences across organisations, small, mid, medium, large, but actually at its heart, is the ability to really understand who's getting the right work at the right time. And that's what we're really going to get under today. In the spirit of reconciliation, Auscontact acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of today's special guests, Kath and Richard, we hope to spark your interest and engage you in the conversation, as well as, provide some ideas for you to take back to your respective businesses. To round off the session, we will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. I'm Fran Southwood, CEO of Auscontact, and I will be your moderator for today. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, we'll just quickly run through some housekeeping with you. Remember to interact with us. That definitely helps maximise the benefits. And as you know, you don't need to take too many notes, as we'll provide you with a recording of the webinar at the end. But if you are wanting to interact, please use the Q&A button on the control panel or the chat feature. You can ask questions or make comments as you go, as we work through it for Kath, Richard, or for myself. And if they're related to what we're already talking about, I'll actually interject with those as we're working through it. We will have a full Q&A session at the end where you can ask anything else. If you're anything like me, I say it every time, if I don't write it down, I'll forget it. So if you've got a great thought or a question, make sure you write it down so we can make sure we get to it. If you are listening through headphones or speakers and have any challenges as you're working through it, note that on the control panel there's a raise hand button, so just do that and one of the team from Auscontact will jump in and try and help. Alternatively, you can just revert to the registration confirmation email, which has a whole set of phone numbers that you can access with the access codes, and you can jump in and dial back into the session. So enough from me. I am now going to introduce our speakers for today. So firstly, we're incredibly excited to be joined today by Kath Kirkwood. Kath is the resource scheduler at Relationships Australia in Queensland. And also we have our wonderful partner, Richard Lundgren from Calabrio. Richard is the Customer Success Manager for Calabrio. Thank you both for joining us. Really excited to hear a little bit more today about, the journey, Kath, that you guys have had at Relationships Australia, as you've kind of navigated, a changed result to really help you and your customers, both from an employee perspective, but equally from that customer outcome. So super excited to hear about that. So before we sort of move into that stage proper, Kath, can you get us started? I can imagine your environment at Relationships Australia can be incredibly challenging at times. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about the environment itself. What is it you guys do there? And maybe touch a little bit on your customers and the workforce that you support.
Thanks, Fran. We've been around. I should know, probably 40 to 50 years. And we provide counselling and mediation services to communities all over Queensland. So we have venues from North Queensland all the way down to the Gold Coast as well, and all the regional areas in between. So we have face-to-face venues, and then we also have our contact centre, which we answer all the calls for Queensland. And we also run the Family Relationship Advice Line, and we also have the telephone dispute resolution service, which is a mediation service purely on the telephone for those parents that are separated by distance. We run the Queensland gambling helpline as well. And we also answer ACT's and South Australia's gambling helplines for them as well. So there's a massive range of different clients. A lot of clients that call in on the family relationship advice line are wanting parenting advice or where to start. They've just separated. Where do I start? I have no idea. So we give them information and referrals of where they can source more information. We within Relationships Australia as well, we run different programs, parenting orders programs. We run a few children's contact centres as well. So who knows? You can get absolutely anything when you pick up that phone at first point of contact.
So if I think about your customer, you would have very different stages of, I guess I would call it almost a spectrum of vulnerability. If you think about the customers that you are supporting, and the requirements on your people, on your staff to really, be ready and resilient for that.
Yeah, most definitely. We have two sort of we have a first point of contact, and then for those people that are more vulnerable, need more help than just information referral or a booking at one of our venues, we then pass through to our family relationship advisors who are clinically trained. They have bachelor degrees, and that can go into counselling if needed.
So there you are in the background,
Yeah.
making sure that not only do the right cues get to the right people, but actually they're there when people need it. So from what I'm hearing about your operation, you've got multiple different components to your contact center service. So how do you
Yes.
actually tailor workforce management strategies for all of that?
I suppose when we first onboard new um, agents, whether they be for a more clinical role or whether they be first point of contact, everybody actually starts off with doing first point of contact, um, so that they can understand what sort of clients, customers that we do get. Um, then once they've been around, I think it's probably one section, the family relationship advice line. After about 6 weeks, then they're trained to take the more complex calls and offer different. That's a different set of skills altogether, and those are the people that are, have degrees. Um, so we multi-skill all the time. They even just the first point of contact. They're multi-skilled, so they'll start off on the family relationship advice line. Then we'll move them on to answer the Relationship Australia Queensland line, which is a whole gamut, including parenting orders program. It could be gambling, it could be absolutely
Yeah.
anything. Um, Elder abuse as well, that sort of stuff. So we multi-train all of our agents that come in. A lot of our agents, well, I suppose we don't typically lose them. They just move on to a different section.
Yeah. So
So
it's
we're
definitely the entry point for you guys,
most
and
definitely,
particularly given you actually have a mandate that they do actually start there with your first contact or first point resolution. So that must build a really strong understanding of customer though in your people.
most definitely, most
Yeah,
definitely. And I think if they go into that counselling role first, they can get a little bit lost because sometimes you don't need to overservice. It's something simple. Where do I start? Okay, there's no risk factors, there's none of that. It's just really easy. Where do I start? So it sort of gets them in on that ground level.
definitely. I hadn't even thought of that over servicing, but we'll come back to that because it's a really important point though, right? Being able to differentiate when and where to. What's the size, Kath, that we're dealing with? So, we're saying, you know, size doesn't matter here. The reality is, regardless of the size of the contact center, you've still got those same challenges around workforce management.
Yes.
So what size are you working with?
With leadership as well, who also um, take first point of contact calls, um, between 80 and 95 at the moment.
Yep, excellent. So if you think about your journey over the last little while, obviously we've seen some amazing innovation across tech. We've seen great emerging products sort of coming about and being available in the market. And I think sometimes there is that misconception that you've got to be huge to be able to access, cool stuff. Richard, I know you're going to help us out and tell us that's not the case, but probably that's certainly my view. Um, it actually doesn't matter. But when you think about your environment, what role does technology play in overcoming some of those WFM challenges? And maybe share with us what you consider the toughest part of WFM within your environment is, and how that tech's actually helping you overcome it.
I suppose would be our telephony integrate has been integrated with Calabrio, so we have that really overarching view of what agents are doing, because we do have oh goodness, sorry, words are hard today. We do have a hybrid working environment, so we have
Yep.
people at home, we have people in the office all the time. So with that, it's easily, you can see if there's any issues or opportunities for coaching, so we can sort of get onto that behavioral stuff a lot quicker than I suppose we have in the past.
Yeah. And does it make it easier? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of organisations that have been challenged by the hybrid model, and for me, it's really that you almost need a different view of leadership, right? You've got to be able to see those signs. So having that visibility in your system means your people can kind of step into that and recognise where people do need additional support. Has that been well received by your people? Has it made a difference for
I
your
think it's
staff?
I think it definitely has made a difference for the staff. They're now getting coaching more in the areas that they need,
Yeah,
not just a blanket coaching. So I think that they're enjoying that. It's individualized just for them.
yeah,
This is where you're struggling. Is it call containment? Is it um, um, oh, um, oh, that could be many different things, but call containment's a big one. Is it that? How do we contain that call? How do we rein them back in? And our senior practitioners will actually go and have specific coaching sessions with them, and we can just get onto it a lot easier and quicker, so that the issue doesn't become bigger than it needs to be.
yeah. Given all of the services that you guys provide, obviously you must have a lot of queues or a lot of channels.
Yes.
Um, and some are small, some are big. Have you got some really small ones that you've got to deal with?
Yeah, we have the elder abuse line as well, which is like, compared with Relationships Australia, Queensland queue, or the Family Relationship Advice line, is quite small. The gambling ones are a lot smaller as well. Um, so I suppose we're a little bit different. We have somebody on those queues at all times without being
Yeah.
on the bigger queues, so that they don't get suffocated and not answered. So
Yeah. Well, it's a incredibly important customer group, even though it's really small. It's a really vulnerable group, I can imagine. So
most
yeah, you'd
definitely.
have to. Yeah. So Richard, I guess, you see it across different organizations. What are some of the challenges that you see with relation to small queues, multiple queues? Like, I've seen some environments with, kind of a lot. Um,
Yeah.
what do you see the key challenges in forecasting for that?
Look, obviously, forecasting small queues is really challenging. I have worked with customers in the past that have been trying to forecast queues as little as 5 and 6 calls. And it's kind of pointless. It's like, you could win lotto easier than you could forecast a queue that size.
Yeah.
In Kath's case, with what she's got to deal with there, and those queues being the nature of the kind of callers into the contact center, they're critical. I said the older abuse line, gambling, the critical kind of societal issues that, and I think Kath's doing the right thing there, because if they are small queues, and she's saying that she doesn't want them swallowed up in the kind of the overall of the larger queues, to have someone on those queues kind of on a permanent basis that is not taking other calls, it almost seems like a waste of a resource, but at least it's ensuring the calls are getting answered. So sometimes you've got to go down that path. Yeah, from my perspective, I'd rather forecast a queue of 10,000 than a queue of 100. It's easier, essentially. People think bigger numbers are harder, but I think the smaller the contact center, the more challenging overall that it is. In some cases, you can take some of those small queues and combine them to get a kind of at least give you a more accurate kind of combined forecast.
Scale. Yep. Yep.
Assuming those agents are all multi-skilled in all of those queues, that's fine. But yeah, in the case of RAQ, it may not be possible because of the nature of the call. So I think, that strategy that Kath's employed, where she's got someone on that queue permanently, I think is a good one. It ensures those calls get answered. They don't kind of go missing in the ether, essentially, because it could be someone in a crisis on the end of that phone. So it's pretty critical that they do get managed. And I think people in a larger call centres, I don't think the challenge of
Yeah.
of a smaller contact center. And I mean, okay, 90 odd people, it's not tiny. I mean, there's contact centers that are running 15 and 20 people, as you'd be aware. But across all the different skills that Kath is dealing with, that's a fairly big distribution of people to manage that stuff. So it's a challenge. It's difficult.
And you only have to throw in, Kath, things like unplanned leave, let alone planned leave, when you've got one person who's permanently on a queue, and suddenly your backup plan is equally as important as your BAU processes, I'm assuming.
Oh, most definitely. There's a plan A, B, C, and D. Pretty much. I mean, we have a stand up every morning at 9 o'clock. Usually, if something's going to go awry, that's when it'll happen before then. So yeah, there's always a plan in place.
Because then we've always got that thing called the customer who actually don't really care about our occupancy rates or how many people we really have assigned to queues. They just know when they need us. And in your case, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be putting it off based on, what relationships Australia are doing. But it's all about when they need us. So, there's always that extra challenge, isn't it? So if you think about engagement, and I think it's always hard when it's particularly with small queues too, actually keeping people engaged. And there's a question in the chat there that I'll kind of lean into a little bit here, but it's talking about some of the calls that you would be getting would be from vulnerable customers and potentially have an impact on your staff. If you've got one person taking a queue, or even five, if you've got two having really tough calls, that's having a mental load impact on them themselves. Number one, how do you manage that, particularly from a workforce management perspective? But secondly, I'm assuming the leadership team work with you to understand, kind of how will they deal with it? What's the backup then for the impact? And how do you support your people without, kind of slipping into the, can't you just get back on the calls? Like it's a real balance, right? Because you
Yeah.
absolutely empathize and you recognize that, the most important thing is make sure your people are okay, right? To keep taking those calls. Equally, there's a customer. So how do you get that balance right?
We do have for our there's the first point of contact do have supervision. It's probably less clinical, so to speak, than our advisors. Our advisors have supervision. If they're full time, they have it 2.5 hours of supervision with a clinical supervisor every month. They also have one-on-ones with their people leaders every month. They do get every month as well. Like there's a lot of shrinkage. They get either admin once a month or call quality so that they can go and listen to their own calls. So that just gives them time off the calls as well. If somebody's having a bad call or had a bad call, they can go and debrief with one of our leadership team at any time. There's always, there's 5 or 6 of them roaming around everywhere all the time. More than welcome to, because we use Workplace as well. So, there'll be a message come up. Oh, can I have a debrief? Yep, no problem. Call, message, whatever you want to do.
And that's
So
your priority, I'm guessing.
yeah,
Making
that's
sure
the
that that's
priority. Yeah.
managed. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if that happens to be somebody that's on those smaller queues, then it's right. Okay, who else is trained? Who am I going to pop in there now? Send them a message. All right, I'm popping you on this queue now. And they go, okay, no worries.
So a lot of it's obviously about the communication and making sure that, each of your staff really understand what are those avenues to actually help them deal with any of those challenges.
Yes.
And equally that you're ready to pivot and jump and flex and all of those things in real time, right? Obviously.
Yes, most definitely.
There's just another question here from Lauren, and again, it picks up on, and I know it's not just elder abuse, but that is certainly an easy one for us to be kind of referencing, I guess. And it's just asking whether there's a overflow strategy, I guess, that you have in place. But I think you've just said where you know who's skilled, you tap them and pull them in. Is that kind of your standard overflow
Yeah,
process?
yeah, most definitely. I mean, all the agents that are on those smaller queues are multi-skilled anyway.
Yeah,
And if they're not specifically on that queue, they will always have that skill set on them anyway. So that and those smaller queues come in first before the other queues as well. So if an agent happens to be free, one of those smaller queues is sitting there, that agent will get that before they'll get
first.
something that's sitting there for 5-10 minutes.
Yeah,
So
no, absolutely. And again, we're lots of questions about this one, Kath. Just a question in relation to how your multi-skilled agents react if they're redirected to some of those smaller or more challenging queues. It's just part of BAU to them. Are they comfy? They're all pretty good.
they're all pretty good. They
Yeah,
actually like those as well.
yeah,
Because those queues, or well, the gambling queues are 24/7. So the first shift starts at 6 in the morning, so they're quite happy to finish at 2 in the afternoon, and be on those queues. Um, I'd say they'd probably nearly rather be on those queues, and I think it's probably not about the intensity of the calls. It's more so it's fewer calls.
yeah.
Um, and they do have in between, because we obviously work overnights as well. We also have more paperworky stuff that they can do, because overnight you might get 2 calls, might get a
Yeah.
prank call, you might get no calls. So they've always got work to do
Other work
as
to
well.
do. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you about that. What's your balance with workload? But as you say, there's some things that make your staff actually enjoy some of those things.
Yes.
So as far as misconceptions around workforce management in smaller contact centers, what have you come across in your time? What are those common misconceptions that exist around
Um,
WFM?
I suppose it can be a little bit, it's a blessing and a curse, I suppose. This- but because we are smaller, I know everybody.
Yeah,
Um, which can make it hard sometimes. But with having Calabrio come in, it takes that personal aspect out of it. I'm not doing it, apply for it in Calabrio. If they say no, I mean, I know I put the parameters in there. I know it's going to say no, but it's just makes it less personable, because some people will take a no for leave, or no, you can't do that, and take it very personally and think, oh, they don't like me. Must be, just silly things like that. And
I think it's the same everywhere, Kath.
oh,
Don't
I'm
think
I'm
small
sure it
centers are
is.
special. Yeah,
But yeah, so the workforce planning tool just takes that personal aspect away and makes it a little bit easier on me, because I can easily say, oh, it's all right, Calabrio did that. It's not me. They've said no.
perfect. So the system allows them to fully self-service those sorts of things that they used to have to ask you for?
Um, yes. Look, our system can hook up with our payroll system. We haven't as yet.
Yep.
So that's a little bit manual at the moment, because I have to plug in leave and how much balance and stuff like that. But they can ask for annual leave. It will give them a straight out denial, yes, or pop it on a pending list for me to actually look at. And I mean, it depends on the circumstances of that leave as
Yeah.
well. They can move lunch breaks themselves. They can move their tea breaks. They can um, shift swaps as well with other agents. So they're actually really loving that part of
Yeah,
it.
and I think
Yeah, I'll
you're
bet.
you're you're one of the first collaborative customers in ANZ, I think, Kath, to allow them to move their own breaks and lunches, which but that only came out late last year.
Yeah.
There's a few now, but I think you were the first one actually to allow them to do that, which was interesting.
Well, just giving something back to them that they have control over. They want to have lunch with, and I mean, again, because of the type of calls, we're not, on the phone for 2 minutes and after call work, 30 seconds. Some of these calls can be, 30 minutes, and they're after
Yeah.
call work, because they might be booking a a legal appointment for them as well. So it could be, 20, 25 minutes. So the AHT could be nearly 50 minutes, 55
Yeah.
minutes. So being able to move their lunch breaks just gives them that little bit of flexibility.
Quite empowering too, though, isn't it? So
Yeah.
any opportunity that you can, it's nice to be able to. Kath, I know when we've talked before, you talked about some of the other things that you guys have built into your employee value proposition. So you give them time out to do, like you give them mental health days and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about those other components that, I mean, I guess they're focused on engagement, but really they're focused on the health of your people?
Yes. We've just gone through our agreement because we're under a counselling award.
Yep.
So yeah, we just went through our agreement late last year, and we advocated for 2 mental health days per calendar year, and we got those as well, so that they don't have to give a reason why. I'm just taking a
Yeah.
mental health day. Um, if they feel comfortable, yes, you know, tell your your boss what's going on, why you're wanting that, you're feeling a bit stressed. Most people will actually say, look, I can't, I'm not in the headspace today,
Yep.
as well, when they ring up, 6 in the mornings. So you sort of
That talks a
know.
lot about your environment, though, right? That says that people can actually say that without
Mhm.
worry about what's that going to do? What are they going to think? What's the next action that might come of it? So that speaks a lot about your culture, which is really important. And I know you do a lot of things that are aimed at, when people are there, how do we engage them? How do we keep them connected almost in a bit of an ethos of the organization, some of
Yeah,
your values?
yeah. I mean, we plan out for the year what days we're going to do, what special days. Like, we obviously do NAIDOC week, every year. We'll have certain, staff will go out and enjoy the festivities with different venues at Musgrave Park, anywhere like that. We've had pajama day. We do a That was received very well. We don't
It's so weird, isn't it? Every contact center that I speak to, they all love
love
pajama
pajama
day.
day. Yeah, I think we raised over $600 for the day
That's so
for the
cool.
foundation as well.
Yeah.
You need to do a bring your cat to work day, Kath.
We have had a cat at work, I'm just saying. Because we used to have dogs come in, once a week, smallish dogs, not big ones. Um, we have, we're at Purple Day. Um, we just did soup day last week. That went off. There was a couple of people that volunteered to make soups, or brought our slow cookers in, put them on,
Wow.
bake some bread. Everybody come in, had their soup, and a little bit of a chat while they're grabbing that.
Nice.
So, yeah, we sort of do all those sort of things throughout the year, just to give back a little bit as well.
Yeah, it definitely makes a difference. I must admit, it's for some organizations, that's been one of the biggest challenges of working from home, not having that physical, the vibe, I call it the cult of the contact center, right? There's always plenty on offer that people can jump in and get involved in and feel really a part of something. And I know for some organizations, that has been a challenge with hybrid. Others are thinking a little creatively, how do we, pick a time, we're going to do it via Teams and we'll still, kind of do some of those engagement activities. But it definitely means we have to think differently about it.
Yeah, I mean, there was people at home that day as well. They still donated, that still wore their jammies.
Yeah.
They took photos, sent them in. Everyone saw them on Workplace. So, still being a part of it.
Yep. So there's a couple of questions here. I'm just going to kind of throw them in the mix.
Hmm.
Um, One's asking in relation to, we touched on unplanned leave a little bit before. Um, how do you manage that? Obviously we all have our seasonality, and I know up here in Brisbane we like to think it's cold, probably not quite as bad as other parts of the country. But how does, operating multi-queues, some small, some big, but a under 100-seat contact center, how do you manage with your forecasting? I was talking to someone last week who said their UPL meant that for some of their teams, they had days where they had 50% of their team not there, which is a big thing to manage, right?
Yes. I suppose we're a little bit lucky. The leadership and some of the other team members, because they've all sort of come through the same way, we can pull them from what they were doing, pull them in. You be on that queue, free up that person to be on here.
Yeah.
Our leadership will jump in and take calls wherever needed. So I suppose we're a little bit lucky. We can pull from a few different areas.
That also, I think, enhances the culture as well, Kath. When you've got your leadership team who can actually
Yeah.
jump onto the phones and do the calls, that's a really big example to everyone. And I think that just, I guess, shouts what your culture's like from that
Well,
perspective.
our senior practitioners, they're on service delivery for 33% of their time. The people leaders, they will be back up and jump in usually Mondays, being the busier day, and that usually is when all the UPL comes in. Touch wood, depends what sort of week it's going on. But yeah, everybody will just jump in, take calls as needed.
I think you're right, Richard. It definitely speaks to culture.
Mm.
And so I guess, Kath, when you think about strategies that a smaller centre has to adopt to actually handle, whether it's UPL, so there's a spike in need, or even if it's just a workload spike, there are other things you do, or mostly you've got some really strong backup plans in place, which include those senior leaders and senior practitioners.
Yeah, it's probably the senior leaders and practitioners and stuff that will actually jump in, knowing like, okay, a big day for us would be a Monday after a public holiday. I'll make sure
Yeah.
I have more people start early. Um, Melbourne Cup Day is a massive day. So we make sure that we have a couple of people on those smaller queues because we're going to get those calls. And a lot of those calls are people wanting help to actually gamble, not to because they've lost their passwords. They can't make the bet. So they will ring in. And I mean, it will probably double on Melbourne Cup Day. Grand final days, stuff like that will actually be busier.
But
Um,
have you found as well, Kath, with this the I guess the current cost of living crisis, have your calls increased due to that, do you think, as well? Is that something that's been driving it to some degree?
on the gambling or just in
No,
general?
just in general, like with yeah, with interest rates and inflation, all that kind of stuff, has that been a driver for more calls into the centre? Like,
I
Financial stress.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
haven't actually heard that from
that,
any of the leaders because obviously I don't listen to the calls. I'm not clinical. I'm not listening to that. But you would think it'd have to, and whether that separation is because of that cost of living crisis and whether that's sort of spurring it on quicker. I know that we had a bit of a spike in, people with separations during COVID because they were so, have to be together. So, it different. Yeah, it's hard to say what's going to trigger,
Mhm.
unless there's a venue that is advertising some type of program that they're running, um, whether it be an LGBTIQ course, something, and we'll start to get a spike of calls for that venue for that.
Yeah.
Um, but no, the calls are fairly consistent,
Okay.
to be honest,
Yeah.
especially in our biggest queue, the family relationship advice line and the RAQ line. They're pretty consistent, the numbers.
Interesting. So, Kath, there's a question here from someone asking if you can tell them what telephony system are you using and what tool you're using for your scheduling, etc., and the different components of it.
We're
So, I'm
using
usually using Calabrio
we're
for
using Calabrio,
WFM.
yes, and our telephony is Twilio.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Um, Richard, I'm going to jump to you and talk a little bit about, again, Calabrio is a WFM solution. Um, you would see often organisations are at a point when you come in, but obviously, the challenge that some face is their size and I guess their view whether there's appetite with different providers. But I mean, you guys work with organisations that are like across all sizes, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, my smallest customer was 14 people.
Yeah.
Um, lovely customer in New Zealand. But look, you know, yeah, we go from the ridiculously small to I think our largest global customer was about 60,000 agents. In kind of APAC, we're probably talking up around the 14, 16, 1800 to the top end, but our average is probably in the the 200 to 300 range, I guess, which is a nice fit. But I mean, like people look at it and think, oh, yeah, workforce management, not worth it for us. We're too small. When you take into account things like just the visibility it gives you for a start is a big value prop. If they're not running anything, they don't know what their adherence is, for example. And even in a small centre, if you can pick up 2, 3, 4, 5 points of adherence, that could be almost in a small set, could be half
FTE.
FTE.
Yeah.
In a larger setup, I've got one of my customers currently where they could probably pick up to the tune of $2 or $3 million a year in savings by implementing some strategies. So it's horses for courses. There's wins right across the whole size spectrum, and although we've got a lot to offer within the product, not every feature is applicable for every customer either. I'm not going to walk into a customer and try and change their world. If they want to schedule fixed shifts because that's what works for their organization and their agents, that's fine. I would encourage them to look at, okay, well, your fixed schedule is okay, but if you did a demand-based schedule, what's the delta between those two? What's the schedule inefficiency? So you at least know what it's costing you to do that. And then you can look at that cost and say, well, if we run fixed schedules, it's costing us X. If we run demand-based schedules, it's going to cost us X minus Y, but then potentially that will drive attrition and dissatisfaction, and what's the cost of that? So it's more looking at things like, yes, I'm not going to try and change their world. If they're happy to do that, it's fine, but they need to be aware of what that inefficiency is. And if it drives their organization, great, happy for them.
Yeah. I think that's definitely the key though, right? Because I know from myself working in big organizations, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
And in fact, the way technology continues to innovate and even around the edges, right? Some of the tweaks around the edges are where you really get your gains.
Yeah.
So I would encourage anyone that's on the call at the moment, actually your challenge is to learn more. And I would be, I always say it at, at any of the events we do with our vendors and our partners, you need to share your problems and share your pain so that our vendor partners can actually understand what your challenges are more, so they can actually build the solution that actually can make a difference. And, my view is, unless you know what's really challenging our industry, Richard, you can't help us make it better. So
absolutely. And we get a chance to talk with the developers on a regular basis as well. And regardless whether you're running Calabrio or some other product, you will always, I mean, I worked for another vendor in a previous life for 10 years, and after 10 years, I was still learning new things about the product after 10 years. So even though you've worked with a product for a lot of years, I had one customer that had worked with that product for 18 years, and they still hadn't seen one screen that was in there in 18 years. So you are always learning. You will always find something in there that you haven't done or haven't seen before, or a customer is doing something a particular way. You thought, oh, why didn't we think of that? So there's it's always kind of evolving essentially from that perspective.
It's definitely the opportunity to learn from that broader group as well, isn't it? It's fantastic. So, Kath, if you think about sort of the pre-life and the post-life as far as, what your new WFM has enabled you to do, have you got any specific examples of where it's actually helped you with some of that complexity around scheduling? And again, when it's you, I know you touched on before that personal component, which I'm with you. I would love that it's no longer the personal. But can you give us any other examples where it's actually where the system or the solution has helped you almost put an arm's distance between some of those challenges?
Annual leave, applying for annual leave.
Oh yeah.
That's a good one. Oh goodness. Letting it do a lot of the work that I don't have to do anymore.
Yeah.
It's those little things. And I
Did
mean,
it take a while for you to trust it?
yeah. Sorry, Richard. It did. It was only because I was used to a different product and yeah. Um, it,
I think that's human nature.
It,
Don't
it,
worry.
it,
yeah.
it's a
I,
typical workforce planner's perspective as well. No workforce planner trusts any system, friend. Um,
I still double check because, well, because we're so strict on work patterns and when they have to have their RDOs and things like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes Calabrio will just throw something out there and you go, what? No. So yeah, always double check everything, but certainly trust more so now because we're more so scheduling to the forecast these days instead of, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to work that. I mean, we still get that, don't get me wrong. We still have people on flexible work agreements, which they're quite able to do. So we have some of those set schedules and then those that don't care.
I think to add to that, one of the misconceptions that you asked about before, Fran, was a lot of people who are putting in workforce management for the first time, regardless of
Yeah.
the flavour of it, think that, okay, we've got this, we just hit the button and off we go. We've got a
Yeah.
forecast, we've got schedules.
And it'll solve everything.
They don't realise that there's a lot of work that goes into producing those end schedules, like the forecasting alone. If you've got a lot of queues or a lot of workload you're forecasting, that takes time, takes effort. Sure, some you can set to do an automated forecast, which we've got in the system. We can do an automated 60-day forecast. It's brilliant. For the queues that aren't volatile, that's great. But there is a process, there is a practice, as anyone doing workforce management who's done workforce management for a while knows. But I think a lot of, and I've experienced this over the years as well, a lot of kind of prospective customers have this impression, oh, well, the sales guy just told me I've got to hit a button and we've got what we need. It's like, yeah, not quite, not quite.
Yeah.
So it's something to be aware of. If you don't have a WFM product now and you're looking at something, yeah, it does take some work and it does take a team to be able to do this properly to get the benefits from it.
Yeah. And I think, the point you raised there though is, there will still always be different parts that you still need to build into it. And it doesn't stop you needing to know your business, right? It actually means suddenly you might have some different ways and faster ways to get some intel, but it's still then up to you to actually design the system, build in your business rules and things like that that actually help you run business the way you want to be running it. So I think, that alignment to, what's your strategy, what are those organizational goals as far as your function, they're still as important. It doesn't change. You've just got to actually make sure you're building the practices behind it. Kath, a couple of questions here, particularly around forecasting small volume end of day. End of day is always a challenge for most people. You've got 24 hours for some of your queues too, don't you? So
Yes.
this one's Melita's just saying that they're nowhere near accurate when forecasting, approximately 144 calls in a 10-hour day. Like how do you get your arrival patterns right?
I'll leave that one to Richard. I actually don't forecast, to be honest.
Yeah.
We had somebody else that was doing that have now left. So
Your turn's coming, Kath, don't worry. Look, 144 calls in a 10-hour day should be relatively doable. It's not a small queue.
Not 5. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not 5. It depends as well whether you're looking at 15-minute or 30-minute intervals as well. I think these days most people seem to run 15-minute intervals.
Yeah.
I sometimes wonder why, because it's not really. I don't see the point if it's not a volatile environment. You're doubling your workload. If you're a 24/7 environment, that gives you 96 intervals a day to worry about as opposed to 48. I'm the laziest person you'll ever meet. So if I can find a way to make it easier and quicker, I will. The 144 calls in a 10-hour day, I guess it depends on what historical data you're using. Are you, and this is to Melita's question, is it the daily volume that's varying? Is it the interval level volume that you're inaccurate? Because there's a difference between the two. Most people look at forecast accuracy at the daily level. If you really want to challenge yourself, look at the interval level. and see how you go there, because so it's a couple of, that's probably we probably don't have time on this call to expand into that, but there's a whole raft of stuff we could talk about from that perspective.
And Richard, I'll just put the plug in there. You're always happy to have a chat to people, aren't you, about
Yeah, absolutely.
some of those components.
Yeah.
Michelle, on the back of that question, Richard, again for you, relationships using historical data in Calabrio to help forecast the call volumes. What's your forecast accuracy rate in there?
Yeah, Michelle, they do, and I don't know the forecast accuracy rate because RAQ is not one of my accounts, although Kath and I go back a long, long way. And no doubt I'll probably be working with Kath a bit when she gets handed the forecasting pattern sooner rather than later, I suspect.
Probably.
I mean, you
Well,
can
Kath,
probably
maybe you know how close you are with your forecasting.
I believe that we're fairly accurate. I want to say probably 95%.
Yep. Cool. Okay, someone else here, Christine, is someone who is trying to introduce WFM as a function. Can you give any compelling examples of realized benefits that you could share? And again, probably not down into the minutiae of, we got this many dollars, but actually, where are you seeing the real savings and the real benefits?
I think adherence is probably one of the biggest things, especially if you've got your hybrids, whether you got your hybrids or not. Something didn't quite feel right, especially overnights. We can go back, have a look, see exactly what's happened. Why were they chucked out of the system? What happened? Did you miss a call? What were you doing? Did you take your breaks at the right time? All of that sort of stuff. So I think the adherence is just invaluable.
I guess one aspect of it, Kath, is adherence, and that's obviously the most obvious and the biggest one. But then look at things like if you're introducing WFM with a lot of the agent self-service stuff, how much time are your team leaders saving from that perspective? How much time is being saved with, instead of going back and forth with emails for leave approvals?
Or getting missed, Richard.
Yeah, absolutely. Or the visibility into the thing, or even things like accurate forecasting, which is going to give you much better CSAT ultimately. If you've got better CSAT, you've got less angry customers, you've got happier agents, less stressed agents. Then you kind of start to look at things like, I know a lot of people focus on things like average handle time and all these kind of KPIs in the contact center. Sometimes, as in Kath's case, if you've got a good culture, that other stuff takes care of itself to a large degree. You don't have to focus on it. And I think if you kind of start focusing on really heavily on KPIs and numbers, I think it takes some of the joy of contact centers away to a large degree. Obviously, depending upon the organization. But again, it's a conversation that we could have, because you could talk about that for a long time. But again, as Fran said, I'm happy to have a chat to anyone about stuff like that as well.
I think the other part of what you were talking there, Richard, around the self-servicing, the impact on people, that they can actually self-manage that stuff, that's a huge benefit. And I think it's one that's really hard to kind of articulate. It's not a financial shift, but it's certainly it's a really empowered position that it ends your people in. And there is so much to be said about an empowered workforce that feel they have more control in an environment that is often controlled for them. So it actually, those little steps make a really big difference. And I don't know, Kath, if you've seen or heard much feedback in relation to that kind of giving them, you talked before about even just being able to move your morning tea and your lunch break. If people that used to report to me could have been able to do that, they would have been cheering from the corner, because it was the one thing they hated, absolutely hated.
No, look, all the agents are loving it. And we're actually looking in the near future of doing dynamic scheduling, which is them basically, it's a form of preference rostering or scheduling. So even giving them a little bit more control. So hopefully, they're more in control of their schedule. Then we're going to have less unplanned leave, happier agents.
Interesting. I know. Yeah, I think that's a great way to go. I think it's one of those challenging spaces. And it's funny, what we often see is even when you tell people, well, go on then, do your own thing, they generally stick to the same pattern. We're such creatures of habit, right?
I've only there's only a handful of them that do it all the time and move their breaks and stuff. They'll all use the shift swap, but moving breaks, there's only a handful of them that will actually do it.
for most
Yeah.
contact centers, that's a foreign concept because they've never been able to do it. You see, so that's
Yeah.
and
I
I
think
think
they like the idea of it though, right?
yeah,
They
yeah,
love the idea of
absolutely.
it.
Look, the other thing I'm a fan of scheduled bidding as well. I think
Yeah,
it's
okay.
very underutilized in this part of the world. It's a very US thing based on seniority. But if you're in a contact center that's performance based, particularly,
Yep.
scheduled bidding works really, really well based on, if you're the top performer for that 4-week period, 28 days, you get the first choice. So if you want a better schedule, lift your performance. And what makes up that performance score ultimately is up to the organisation. But where when I was still working in contact centres, I think 50% of our performance score was based on quality, 25% on adherence, and 25% on other stuff. And we didn't have any bad agents. We had really good performers at the bottom of a really good pile, basically. And if they
Yeah.
wanted a better shift, they would just, and it gave this incremental performance increase across the whole centre continuously.
Okay. I can just picture unions in Australia jumping into that one. There are some complexities around, we would all know it around performance management and things like that. And if you look at how, say, a Qantas does their shift bidding, it's seniority in isolation as opposed to performance. So, but I love what you're saying. I love the idea that you can incentivize
And we
some
did
sort of
invite
benefit.
we did
Yeah.
invite the union in when we talked about this, and all
Yeah.
the agents said no, we want the EBA, the union go away, basically. So they made their choice essentially. There was 4 people that voted for the union, but they made their choice.
Yeah.
We gave it totally over to it was their contact center, Fran, basically.
Yeah.
The way I look at it, we're here to support the guys and girls on the phone because they're the ones doing the tough gig.
Absolutely.
Our gig is easy in comparison.
Yeah, no, definitely agree with that. Kath, you were saying before you use Twilio for your telephony system.
Yes.
Obviously, you've got Calabrio now integrated with that. And you
Yes.
talked before about payroll being something that's potentially down the line for you guys. Um, do the staff, when they're using, the scheduling tool and the shift swaps, etc., is that through an app? Is it through a desktop, something? What is it?
Both. They're
Right, okay.
both. So they have obviously on their desktop when they log into work or on their laptop, but they also have it on an app on their phone as well. So they
Well,
can they can
I
be
bet they
out.
love that.
Well, yes, I thought that they would be better at using the app because
Interesting.
yeah, well, because I thought, yep, okay, you don't know what time you're starting or you forgot what time you're starting Monday. Okay, I'll just look at the app. No, they'll just rock up late. Oh, I thought it started at this time. So I thought that it has, I mean, has changed a lot, but you still
Yeah.
get that odd person. It's like, well, why
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
you just
It
look?
probably gives you an avenue though to continue to impress as far as your people, as you're moving more into, I guess, a maturity with your app. If it stops it being an excuse for people to rock up late, that's when it sort of starts to turn. You know what I mean? Like opposed from, why didn't you use your app to, but you didn't use your app. You should have.
Yeah,
Interesting. Yeah, I'm with you. I thought they would have loved to have been able to see it. But you know what's funny? I think we assume people want what we give them, and they don't always actually want it or use it. So, and you're not going to get everybody over the line,
no.
are you?
Oh no, I think it's a generational thing. The younger generation love their apps and they'll go in and do everything on the app. Where some of them will still go to they're a bit older school and will still go to the team leader or people leader and say, "Hey, can I do this?" So I
Yes,
mean,
yes, you can.
I still don't care if I get an email about a shift
Yeah,
swap. I'm still gonna
yeah.
do it.
Well,
It's
the good
it's
thing is it's not from everybody, right?
no,
So,
no, 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 not from
yeah,
everybody. And I mean, it's
yeah,
even in Calabrio, it's like 3 clicks to swap a shift. So
yeah. For you to swap it for them, you mean?
yeah, I just have to
Right.
click
So
on their
that's way better.
names. Yeah, click
Yeah,
on their
yeah, yeah.
names and then shift swap.
We
Boom.
used to have full-time people that their job was shift swaps, and it's just like the resource investment into that sort of thing, when you can shift that into something like this, I think that stuff makes a huge difference.
Most
Definitely. You'd
definitely.
probably still see it, Richard. um, so if you think about your new environment, you've seen some amazing changes, you've got your people kind of moving in there. What would you say you've now got kind of well established as far as best practices go for not just maximizing the benefits of the system, but actually making a difference to the outcomes you're getting? What sort of things would you say you've established?
Optimizing breaks.
Yep.
I check that daily. Check work patterns are correct, because that can throw out a lot of things. Some people work different hours, even like they work a longer day to have an extra day off in the month, things like that. And also make sure that our smaller queues are, because we're contracted, for those is to make sure that they're always properly manned.
Yeah.
That's sort of, I suppose, best practice for me. That's a daily thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes even a couple of times a day, just making sure that everything is right, because something can change like that.
I mean, do
Yeah.
you have a kind of a list, Kath, of like your daily, weekly, monthly tasks that you would regularly do?
Not, look, I know I should, but it's pretty much just in my head because I'm the only one that actually does this. So when I go on, 4 weeks annual leave, I have somebody that comes in and fills in for me that they've done so for a couple of times. It's one of the other agents that will come in and backfill my role, not do the whole role, but do the basics to get through without me. Um, so a lot of it is in my head, to be
Mhm.
Yeah.
honest.
Mhm.
Change management. This would have been a big change for you, but an equally big change for your people. How did you
It
manage
had.
it? How did you make sure, that fear factor
We
disappeared?
um we I did up a great slideshow for them. We have a quarterly meeting, um, say every quarter, and did a presentation for them. Said, okay, this is what's happening. This is Calabrio. This is what you'll be able to do. Didn't give them really too many features. Let them have it on the app, but didn't give them any room to move.
Start
Um,
small.
yep, start small. Then started, okay, let's go with shift swaps. I think we went shift swaps first. And then the later thing was the moving of the brakes. Um, it's just in those meetings, sending that out, letting everybody know face to face or, via Teams or whatnot, that, this is happening. This is the next stage. This is the next stage. And I'm not sure whether they've heard grumblings about the dynamic scheduling and being able to pick preferences and stuff like that. Um, but I think they will be very excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you could plant a few of those little teasers, right?
Possibly
And
could.
well, it's a challenging one though, right? Because you've got to go in slow, and it might be that it's a hybrid dynamic scheduling. It might be that it's, with really clear, sort of support
Yeah.
frame in place to
I
start with
think,
before you open
yeah,
it up.
I think what I'll probably do is start it, um, with the first point of contact, to be honest, start there.
Yeah.
Um, because their schedules are a lot easier than the um, advisors,
Yeah.
because the advisors just have a lot of shrinkage with what they have to have throughout their month. Um, so yeah, I was thinking I may start there and see how we go. I mean, a lot of them, obviously I know who likes to work nights, who doesn't, who does this night, who's got netball that night. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm hoping that it will just make a big difference for them.
Yeah. I think it's the perception of empowerment as well, though, right?
Yeah.
Even
Oh,
though they might end
definitely.
up doing exactly what they've done anyway, it actually doesn't matter.
Well, they're still going to have to
Still
pick a
their
night shift.
control.
They're still
Yeah.
going to have to pick a night shift to actually save that schedule that they want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, it's a win-win, really.
Oh, for sure. So again, we've got people on here that are probably thinking, yeah, we've been toying with the idea of WFM. We've thought about this. What advice would you give to other contact centres, considering working with, the likes of Richard, um, to really sort of rethink that WFM workforce management, like that need, or that ability to take them forward, right? What would your advice be?
Do it. You're not going to look back because you're going to
Yeah.
have better agent engagement. When you have better agent engagement, they're going to show up. They're going to do the right thing. I just think it just makes everybody's life easier. And there's it's good for the agents. It's also got more transparency for leadership as well, to see exactly
Yeah.
what's going on. Not, oh, I think that this is what's happening. You can actually see and have data to say, yes, this is what's happening.
There's a question here that says, and it's from Tanya, if you could have one tech innovation to help out with all the daily juggling that you do with queues, et cetera, what's at the top of your wish list?
Oh, another person in my team?
That'd be nice.
It would be, but no, oh, I
Is it
don't
some of that next iteration that you're talking about? Is that kind of almost
probably
the tools there, but your
it's tools.
applications are opening up?
Yeah, it's about setting that up in the background, and because we've had a couple of people that use the Calabrio in the background have left. I'm the only one that has access to that now, so it's just it's a little bit slower than we would have hoped for. We were hoping by now
Yeah.
that we'd have it up and running, but I think that will be an awesome thing.
I think even with the best technology, whether it be on the WFM side or the telephony side, is still dealing with human nature at the end of the day. And it
Yes,
doesn't
that's
matter
true.
what you put in, someone's going to get around it. Someone's
Oh,
going to,
yes.
human nature is a powerful thing,
Yeah, true.
and you can't break that. So I think regardless of the technology, whether it be now, 5 years, 10 years down the track with AI and everything else, it's still going to be a challenge.
Yeah, it's just about relieving some of those components that actually make your job a bit easier in actually managing or juggling those challenges, I think,
Yeah.
Kath. But anyway,
Yes.
look, thank you guys. I could talk about this stuff all day because, I am a true contact center nerd, but it's because I love it. And it's also because the impact of these sorts of things, the impact they're having on our customer and our people, it is so huge. Like it's almost game changing when you can get it right, and when you can get those small levers that really make a difference and make our people feel like they're not only connected to decision making, but they're in control of some of that themselves. So thank you, Kath. It has been wonderful hearing from you and learning a little bit more about your journey as you guys have continued to sort of grow and mature within the environment. Richard, it is always great hearing from you. Know your stuff, and it makes such a difference when you kind of are working with partners that actually want to know your business well to get underneath and think about what are the things that could work for you. So thank you both. It has been awesome. Thank you everybody for coming along. We've had some great questions in the chat, and I know lots of thank yous from everybody. So enjoy the rest of your day, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Kath. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Fran.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.